Hi everyone, my name is Danielle and I'm the sole owner of Dani's Cake Pop Shop. Growing up, I always wanted to be a mom, and with that, I also wanted to be a baker. So I know that my goal was to combine the two at some point when I was older and have both. My time with my kids was so important to me, and that was my deciding factor on becoming a full-time business owner when the time was available to do so. I did work in corporate America for many years, but I wanted to be home with my children and spend time with them while also pursuing a career in being a business owner with a bakery. In the very beginning, my claim to fame was cake pops. I did love making them. It was really my hobby I was in at that time. Aside from making cakes, I did that more when I was younger, but my hobby was cake pops. And that's when my friends started to tell me I should go into business. And so I went in business as Dani's Cake Pop Shop. Dani was my nickname my parents gave me. And I thought that sounded pretty catchy with the name. So cake pops was my claim to fame, and I would teach that all over the country. And then after a while, they take very long. So I felt like I wasn't getting enough money for how long it took me to do those products. So it would be like hours, like maybe 6 hours to do a dozen cake pops after they're sculpted. And I felt like that time was not paid for. So I did end up turning into cakes more and leaning into that more and having a bigger price point for that, which took half the time. So that really, I ended up doing cakes after the cake pop had kind of phased out. And that was more how I took my business and skyrocketed it into more income and more clients and more opportunities for myself in the long haul. I did meet a mentor who was extremely helpful in getting me into spaces that I would never be able to get into as just one person doing this for the very first time. This gentleman I met was owner of an events magazine and a real big wig in the industry of events and brides and weddings and all kinds of things like that. He met with me at his house the one night and offered for me to come to his event the very next day in Philadelphia at Cuba Libre, and offered for me to bring my desserts, the cake pops at that time. And I went home and worked the entire night through to show up the next day his event. And I know that it was the most scariest thing I ever did in my entire life, just being very new to the scene, new to the business, but just jumping, head first into what I thought I was ready for. My very first cake order was a doozy. It took me very long. It was very small from what I can do at this point in my career. I do remember that it was a small wine-themed cake with grapes and corks and all kinds of things, and I was so proud of that cake. It took me a very long time to finish it, and I know that my client was so happy with it, and my first dollar is framed behind me. It's the first dollar I ever made in the business. So that was starting point for me, and the reaction she gave was just everything I ever wanted and dreamed of, and that really gave me the ambitions to continue on and make myself, be proud of myself for the work I did and know that I can do that, even though sometimes I feel like I'm my own worst critic. I remember this one time, and when you're a sole business owner, you have to do everything yourself. You have to do all the dishes, all the baking, all the shopping, everything behind the scenes that nobody knows about, and only you know as a baker, but all they see is this finished product and they go, a cake, and you think about all the things you went through to make that cake for them. Remember one time I had a huge order due for a very big business, and I ended up in the emergency room with a ruptured ovarian cyst, and I was on all kinds of medications, and all I could tell the doctor was, I need to go home to finish my order. Please let me out of here. I have to go. And I know I spent hours in the emergency room, and I came home after that and worked through the night, recovering and all through the night, standing on my feet to get this order finished and delivered to the customer the next day, which had to be done. There were no options, and I rallied through and I did it. I probably shouldn't have, but I had no choice at that point. And that's when I feel like I knew I could do anything after I did that. During the pandemic was very scary, I know, for myself and many other business owners. Before that, I had been teaching all over the country. I would travel the country to teach at cake shows, to teach other bakers. I taught classes in New York City. I taught classes in St. Louis, Missouri, and Philadelphia, and Miami, Florida. And I knew that I had that skill to pivot into the pandemic and use that to create a source of income through Zoom cake classes. I had kids classes, adult classes, teen classes, and I would deliver cake kits to their door. They would pick them up, and we did a class on Zoom on how to make a cake from start to finish. And that was part of how I pivoted for my income, because everything was closed. No one's having parties, so no one needs big cakes or whatnot. And I had to figure out how to create a new product that parents and families would want to celebrate their kids with. So I made what I called household cakes. And it was just for the household, like 5 people who lived in the house. It would be a smaller cake that they could still celebrate with their family and still be able to have a memory experience. And I was still able to provide cakes for the community. And that ended up being my busiest time. One of the busiest times I've ever had. I did about 80 cakes in 6 months, which is kind of crazy to think about at this point, but I know it was all for the greater good, and everyone had a memory, even in one of the hardest times of all of our lives. I think I was searching for just success in myself and believing in myself, because I know that I'm very hard on myself, and I think being able to do all that from just by myself and having nothing to start with and creating this whole business just by me is the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, except for raising kids.